All right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the what am I saying? Ladies and gentlemen of the internet, we're here at the Museum of Glass for our monthly interview and performance series. And if you're out there and there's still time, if you want to join us in person, you're welcome to join us in the theater here. But today we have the wonderful pleasure of having the great composer and drummer and vibraphonist and educator Brian Kirk with us. Brian, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Kareem. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Now, we did
really
one of these
appreciate it.
already. This was probably at the beginning of the pandemic.
Correct.
So it was not open to the public. It was just online. And we talked more about you and your beginnings as a musician and what it was like growing up in Indiana. And we can certainly touch on that again. But I wanted to maybe cover some different ground. So
Okay.
I would like to start. Now, for those of you that haven't watched these before, if you just go on our YouTube page, Kareem Kandi World Orchestra, and look up Brian Kirk, you can find that on there. The first interview. There's a lot of great information on there because Brian's got a ton of stories about all these different musicians that he was around because of his father and his sphere of influence, and your own career with great artists, living in New York and all over the place. But can we maybe talk about, let's dive in and talk about your time in San Francisco growing up, because it was a great time for jazz in San Francisco. So what time period, what year did you move to San Francisco?
We moved to San Francisco in 1968. And before I start, I just want to say thank you for having me here. Of course, and thank you for keeping the fire and the flame alive in Tacoma and the Puget Sound area in terms of jazz and jazz curriculum, jazz studies, and jazz performance. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate it. Yes. So my father, and can I show the picture? This is pretty. The picture's there. That's Willis Kirk. He was an educator and bebop musician, and he wrote a book called Brush Fire, which is the mastery of brushes. One day, I think it was in the 80s, I said, Dad, you need to write a book about brushes because nobody plays like you. And Wes Montgomery, who he lived across the street from, his grandmother said the same thing. So he put it all down. As a matter of fact, Kareem, I have some books for your students I'd like to give to you.
Thank you very much.
For Tacoma Art or wherever.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What we'll do is we'll also, because I think it's kind of hard to see on the camera here,
Yep.
but we'll get these blown up and just make a post about it so that people know too. And these are for sale online. People can purchase them or order copies?
It's out of print.
Wow.
You got to do it from me. It's Hal Leonard actually is done publishing it, unfortunately. So I got to figure out what to do next.
We'll just charge $8,000 for each copy.
I saw one on Amazon for like $800. I was like, "Are you serious?" So we got rid of. My son-in-law works for Amazon fraud division, and he threw a letter his way, and that was taken down. So.
Well, I mean,
but anyway,
and as an aside, I think this is important because number one, brushwork. A lot of drummers don't even know about brushes nowadays, sadly, unless they play drums because it's not really called upon.
That's right.
But there's so many. I mean, you can basically play any style with brushes and do it well. There's many wonderful artists like yourself or Jeff Hamilton or Ollie Jackson. Tons of great artists that do amazing things.
Clayton Cameron.
Yes.
So many players.
So I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say poorly is that this information, like how to do this by people that know how to do it, needs to be saved and cataloged and passed on.
And passed on.
Important.
So here's the book. But in 1968, we moved to San Francisco, California, because Wes and Buddy and Monk and Dad's best friend, Benny Barth, came out west in 63 and said, Kirk, you got to go west because Indiana is Indiana. Let's put it like that. So we got in the trailer, and we actually went out in 64 to visit. I think it was 64, 65, something like that, maybe 66. 2 years later, a few years later, we moved. We actually found a house to rent. Benny Barth found a house, and we rented. And the thing was, my dad was asked to stay at Indianapolis Public School System number 12 because he had built it from nothing. I mean, they gave him secondhand furniture, and just said, make it happen, right?
And for people that don't know, I mean, like I said, we covered a lot of this in the first interview. But your father, at this point, before he moved out to San Francisco, he had known or performed with Charlie Parker and been around Max Roach.
There's some stories.
Freddie Hubbard was a student of his. J.J. Johnson.
Actually, wasn't a student, but he was on the Indiana Avenue. Indiana Avenue was the place where all the cats got together. J.J., Wes, Buddy, Monk, all the Indianapolis cats. Freddie Hubbard was a young teenager at the time. He was 17 years old. And Freddie would come down, Mr. Kirk, can I sit in? All that kind of thing, you know.
But he also, your dad was playing with Wes Montgomery and Monk Montgomery.
At the time, and going to school. So there was a time where Dad, after coming off the road with Lionel Hampton and Big Maybelle, said there was some incidents where he just knew he wanted to go into music education because the road was the road.
So I guess what by the time you guys made the decision to relocate to
Right.
San Francisco, he
Right.
had already done a considerable body of work in terms of music and education and playing with great minds.
Oh yeah, yeah. He developed a program where they learned by ear, by rote, because there was no music, there was no resources given to black segregated schools, so they had to make it happen. So one of the systems was the actual Lionel Hampton. Lionel Hampton, the Hampton family system in Indianapolis that Dad knew of, but he devised his own to teach kids how to, almost like Suzuki, to learn how to play music by ear. And they went to All City Orchestra and took it first, and it was no music in front of them because the district wouldn't give any. So anyway, that's one of the issues that happened. So we moved to San Francisco. Dad took a job at Elmhurst Junior High School teaching instrumental music, right, and working during the night. So Benny Barth and other San Francisco musicians got him involved with working at the Hungry Eye and places around town. Oh, Playboy Club, for one. And 6 nights a week. So he was working 5 days a week, teaching school, and 6 nights a week gigging.
Sounds like your
He's a busy
schedule.
man. Yeah, kind of schedule like we have, right? Yeah. But, yeah, he was determined to make music still part of his life, even though he was teaching. So it was.
So now, who was around musician-wise, like jazz musician-wise, on the scene in San Francisco at
it was
that
just
time?
enormous. So when we got there, Benny Barth turned us on to all the local cats in San Francisco. And I'm talking about drummers, Vince Ladiano and Smiley Winters and Eddie Marshall, Eddie Moore, Richie Goldberg, Jim Zimmerman. There was a host of Clarence Becton. There was so many drummers. My dad had a club called the Percussion Pool where he actually got together and they all signed up and they came to the house and they drank Jack Daniels and they went downstairs or in the living room and they pulled out the snare drums and went to town with brushes and everybody tried to show each other up. But it was a regular monthly club where all the drummers he got together, because he was really kind of a people person. They all got together and came by. So Benny got everybody involved. And Benny Barth was the drummer that replaced Dad with Wes Montgomery, because Dad recommended Benny because they were good friends, as well as David Baker was my dad's best friend. So Dr. David Baker at Indiana University, which had me go back to IU for that. So, but there were so many cats there at the time. The saxophonist players or Sonny Simmons. Dick Partee. I'm trying to think of there's just so many players that come to mind. I gotta really think about it. Jessica Williams I played with because of Dad when she was in San Francisco. So many bass players, and then my best friend Glenn Pearson and my dad worked together before I met Glenn. So we all worked around the Bay Area.
How old were you at this time, like when you moved?
I was 10. I turned 10. Right. And
Now,
so,
if I remember correctly, you said where you guys lived, you were right next door. Or Joe Henderson lived across.
well,
the
here's the
street from you
story.
guys?
So when we moved to San Francisco, I lived in about 3 blocks. Well, we eventually moved 6 blocks away on Mount Davidson. We lived on Mount Davidson, so we rented a house on Mount Davidson. The actual circumstances surrounding rental of the house was Benny Barth's wife posed as the buyer, as the renter. So before we got to, she was white, and before we got to San Francisco, the landlord thought he was renting to a white woman, and so, surprise. So that's kind of what happened in the '60s, right? So we came here. Same thing happened when we were looking for a house because Dad and Mom had saved a lot of money. My mother was a teacher. She was a reading specialist. So she taught in San Francisco public schools, and Dad taught in the Oakland Unified District for a while, and then went on to City College. But we moved around the corner to a house, Japanese-style house on Los Palmos Drive, which was amazing. On that street, later on, when I was 13, maybe 13 or 14, Joe Henderson moved there. And Joe Henderson, I said, I didn't know who he was, and Dad knew of course he did. And so I said, Joe, man, what are you doing here? And he said, I joined Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and I quit the band in 6 weeks and took the front money. I said, what'd you do that for? I said, that's Blood, Sweat, and Tears. What goes up? I said, man, I couldn't stand that music. I just want to play jazz. But they were making a lot of money. So I took the money and bought a house. He bought a 12-room house for $100,000, about $110,000 on Los Palmas.
That was a long time ago.
Yes, it was. And it was just him. Yeah. It was I got stories about Joe, but he would find rooms like a year later, say, hey, man, I found a room in my house. I'm like, wow.
Like the Winchester Mansion.
Yeah, it was a nice house. Very nice house.
Well, this is kind of a bit of a left turn, but I'm curious because I hadn't thought about this, so you just mentioned this now with the renting, having to have the white woman rent the house, otherwise they would have rented it. Now, you moved
pose as a renter.
Right. So you moved from the East Coast out to the West Coast.
Or Midwest.
And, and so... And there's always, talk about like the differences in personalities and people. Did you find the racism to be more out in the open in the Midwest versus on the West Coast? It's still there, but it's more veiled. Is that a fair assumption at the time?
The West Coast was a little bit more veiled.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's not as out as it was still clearly there if they weren't going to rent to you. But
right, they wouldn't rent to They would not rent to Willie Mays in the '50s, just before we came. Yeah. So here's Say Hey Kid, and that area where we actually bought. Willie Mays could not buy a house, and he couldn't rent it, so it had to be rented through somebody else. Matter of fact, I was Willie Mays' paper boy when I was 13. So.
Well, as we both know, here we are in 2023, and we say we've come so far. In many ways, we really haven't. But it's just, I'm just curious if the racism is more open and out in the public in the Midwest versus West Coast. It's clearly still there at the time in the 1960s.
It's pretty subtle, but there was some definitely systems in place that did not allow you to maneuver easily. I didn't say shut you out, because my dad went through a whole lot and still became the president of City College of San Francisco. So
here's a question. So then the scene in terms of, we're talking about mid-ish 60s, civil rights movement, 60s, all the rest of that 60s, kind of stuff. Yeah. Was the scene pretty much everybody playing together, or was there pockets?
Yes. Yeah. Here's the scene. When I was 14 years old, I used to go down and hear Carlos Santana rehearse on Mission Street. People for days and blocks. You just stand out there and he's doing it. Oye, como va? Mi ritmo. I was just like the whole thing. Outside. And we're all standing on the street. When I was going to junior high school, Sly's mother lived down the street from Aptus Junior High School, near the El Rey Theater in a district called Ingleside. And we used to stand outside and just listen to Sly and the Family Stone. I want to take you higher. Just get down to a point where the police put one of those decimal meters, the old school one, across the street, because there was people everywhere all the time. And they put a decimal meter up there, and I guess it raised to the level that was unacceptable for her neighborhood. And so we came back a couple of times to rehearse, and there wasn't a rehearsal. We had found out that Sly had been told that he had to move. So there was an amalgamation of music that was incredible. There was straight ahead jazz. There was Tower Power. There was Cold Blood. There was Sly Stone. These are all local. Then I'd go down and hear Jefferson Airplane, rehearse, right, with Grace Slick and the whole thing right down Golden Gate Park. I'm not supposed to be there and doing what I was doing, but, it was San Francisco. So there was an amazing, amalgamation of musical styles. One of the greatest things I've accomplished in my mind was I actually worked 40 musical styles in one day. I did the Gay Men's Chorus. I did the Handel's Messiah early in the morning or whatever it was. And then I went and played a rock gig. I played a funk gig. And then I played a jazz gig all in one day. It was unbelievable. I was
And
like,
I mean,
man,
there's great musicians representing all those
All of
styles
them.
too.
All of them.
Was there much of like a Cuban scene or Brazilian
Big
scene as
time.
well? Yeah.
big time Cuban thing. I actually studied with David Frazier and the Rumberos in Berkeley. I studied Bata rhythms and the Yoruban culture with them, and so that whole rumba scene is real big in Oakland, East Bay. Yes, still is.
And so at the time, again, we're mid to late 60s here. Both you and your father are gigging a ton and working.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that was kind of a neat thing. I was doing some funk gigs, and he was, straight ahead. His bebop thing, casuals we call them on the West Coast. But yeah, weddings, bar mitzvahs, private parties were happening. He'd come in, and I'd come in from playing a gig with like Prime Suspect. The name of the band was called Prime Suspect, right? So I'd come in from the gig, and he'd be at the table, and he said, "I can't," he had Jack Daniels, right? And he said, "I can't give you a little taste, but you want a little taste?" I was like, "No, Dad, I can't drink with my dad." I was like, "No, I can't do that." But eventually, after 21, I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." Yeah.
Well, so maybe this is a ridiculous question, but was your father your first teacher on the drums?
He was.
He taught you how to play.
He was my first teacher, and he was one frustrated individual because he was as serious as a heart attack about drums and music, and I wasn't. Especially and the piano too. So at West Portal Elementary School, I got the bug because I started playing saxophone with the school band, right? These, you have a music program at school like you teach, right? I started playing alto, and I couldn't get a sound, man. I could squeak, squeak, squeak. I couldn't get the notes, And the guy said, "Hey, doesn't your father play drums?" I go, "Yeah." He said, "I think you should play drums." So I just put the saxophone back, and the next time I came, he gave me a Haskell Haar book of snare drum studies, right? And I think it was a Remo practice pad, or one of the practice pads was plastic at the time. So I just got into that, and finally got with the guys at school. I was in band, and we played some Beatles tunes. Hey Jude, we got into all that, and so I was like, man, this is kind of fun playing a band and people for the assembly at school. And people were like, ah. So, yeah, I got serious about it later on. But I didn't study with Dad because Dad said, this is a new era. I don't play rock. You need to study with a guy that has that kind of rhythm and that kind of concept. So I actually found Chuck Brown. Actually, I started studying with John Puhara, who was my very first teacher other than my dad at Kenny Williams Drumland. Let me tell you about Kenny Williams Drumland. Everybody in the world would come down to Kenny Williams Drumland and just sit around and just BS. And then somebody would come in with some super chops, right? And they just mouths open and everybody's just staring and go, whoa, blah, blah, blah. But it was like a hang. It's like guys didn't, they didn't have day gigs. They were just musicians, right? And they would just come and hang at Kenny Williams. So I met Tony Williams there. He came to my lesson with John once. And I had just bought a record called Spring by Tony Williams, because I was really getting into Tony at that age. I think I was 15, 16 years old. And he came in, and Kenny opened the door and brought him in, and he said, "Gentlemen, this is Tony Williams." I was like, and so was John. John was like, and we didn't say anything for a while. He said, "Hey, how you guys doing?" And then I said, "Would you sign my record?" Because I had it in a Tower record bag, and he signed a record. And so, yeah, that whole scene in San Francisco, man, it's just piano, bass, drum. I mean, it was like amazing. There were clubs we could go to, like your students, and play. I was underage learning. It was a wonderful thing. I couldn't get in. I had to draw a mustache or something, take a marker and put it on my face. But nobody seemed to really mind. The liquor laws weren't as stringent, In San Francisco, like I said, man, it was loosey-goosey.
There was no internet at the time, and
No
cameras
internet.
weren't everywhere.
Right. And then, it was Polaroid cameras. You can take a picture and send it to the liquor board if you wanted to. But essentially, we got to learn. We got to hang out. Keystone Corner was the place that I really stayed at. I mean, that was our university. I sat out many a night listening to so many guys.
So who are some of the artists for you that were really, really great and memorable coming through? Because now, I mean, we're talking mid-'60s. That's one of the
Well,
great
no, we're talking
periods of
70s
jazz.
now. We're talking about 70s now. So I'm talking 70, 72 through 70, my high school years. I graduated in 76. So we're talking 70 through, 80.
So who are some groups that you really enjoyed?
Oh,
seeing?
everybody. Max Roach, of course. McCoy Cantana came a lot. Tony came a lot. Rahsaan Roland Kirk came a lot with 3 horns and a rubber hose. Played them all together. 3 horns and with his apparatus and a rubber hose, and your normal garden hose. He was amazing. So Milton, the sound man, used to say, because we were underage, he said, "Look, hang out come the last set, and I will let you stand by the sound booth. I will let you on like a door, like the side door, or back door. I'll let you in. You stand there." Because it was, Todd Barkin wouldn't have liked that at all, but he did it, and I'm grateful to him because it was just me. Because I said, "Can I bring my girlfriend at the time?" He said, "Nope, can only just you." So I would stand there and I hear McCoy for 2 nights, 3 nights where I could. You name it. Dexter, of course. Right, Eddie Gladden on drums, and
Is that the one with George Cables and Rufus Reed?
Yes, and then Buster, and then Ron Carter's group came through, and man, you name it, they came through. Lou Donaldson, of course, and Bobby Hutcherson. Yes.
So then you're in San Francisco. You're graduating high school, and then from there, college. Where was college?
I graduated from high school. I went to City College in San Francisco for a couple of years. And I said, I want to do this music full time, and what school should I go to? So my mom graduated from Indiana University. My dad graduated from Butler University. And so I knew about IU. I knew about the music school, and one of the best schools in the country, apparently.
Was David Baker still there at the time? Or?
Check this out. He was. And then he went on a sabbatical 1 month before I got in the car and drove all of my stuff to Indiana. So my dad's best friend was not there. So I got all the way to Indiana, and it's 5,000 music majors. It's 7 orchestras, 3 concert bands, a marching 100, and probably about 45 combos. It was a factory, and it was like swimming uphill if you didn't know anybody, upstream if you didn't know anybody. So one of the things is I went there as a probationary percussion major, and I actually really wanted to study with George Gaber. And George Gaber told me that I should be a jazz major. He wouldn't accept me as a percussion major. Then he went on sabbatical. So here I am, a provisionary percussion major. I'm not going to do jazz. There's no blacks in the percussion department. There's 45 of us. There's no blacks in there. So I guess George Gaber says I'm not going to be first. So I stayed there, and I really practiced. I mean, I didn't know the ropes, so I did not sign up for the practice rooms at the time. And it was classical is what I had to practice. I had to do repertoire on the mallets. That was the whole deal. Marimba, xylophone, the whole, and classical snare drum.
So prior to this, and I'm glad you were going to this and segueing into this thing because I wanted to go there today. Did you said your father played piano? Did he teach you piano?
He tried.
And prior to becoming the percussion major and dealing with all the stuff with mallets, marimba, and I'm assuming vibraphone and bells and all that kind of stuff, had you had any experience on piano?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
I took 2 years of piano in Indiana with Trilla Smith, who used to hit me with a ruler if I was wrong. Right? Wrong. No, I'll do it again. Bam! Not a ruler, excuse me, a pencil. Good thing it was only a pencil. Slapped me on the knuckles, right? And she was a good friend of my dad's. Her son was about my age, a bass player named Frankie Smith, who's had a career in bass and playing for a living for many years, cruise ships and different famous acts, traveling the world. And then he forced me to do it for 2 years, and I didn't want to do it. I was like, man, let's go out. I mean, this is Indiana. You know what we do? We shoot basketball. And that's what I wanted to do. because that's what they do. So he finally said, okay, you can stop, but you're going to be sorry. I was like, okay, I can stop. Well, I was sorry. After a while, I was like, dang. Could have had some. I mean, I got the knowledge, theoretical knowledge, of course, because I studied. I was a music major, but the chops, they just didn't put the time in for the piano.
Well, so now I've known you for a long time, and I never even knew you played vibes until all of a sudden now I'm starting to see you gigging and things. So when did the bug bite you to want to start getting back into it and playing?
Well, my wife, actually was playing since I got here in '96, but I only played at school. So I played at City College, at Seattle Central with the students. So I would always teach from that, play there, do all the concerts. But I had a family like you, and it was like, okay, how do you make a living? So I made a living playing drums and, playing and teaching at night. So the vibraphone was always something I did every day, but it was always at the college.
So then that leads me to my next question for you then. When you started being aware of vibes and playing, who were some, now I know your father had been with Lionel Hampton, who were some interests or musicians that you really admired their playing on the vibraphone?
Milt Jackson and Buddy Montgomery. They're my first two loves. Because Buddy played vibes and he'd come over the house. Because Buddy moved from Milwaukee to L.A. to San Francisco. So I saw Buddy a lot. And he, ding dong, hey, Kirk, I'm going to play vibes. Go down and play vibes. And he would go down and play the Jinko vibes. And I'd hear him through the floor. And I was like, whoa, what a beautiful sound, of course. But initially, it was through classical music that I really wanted to study. So I studied for Cal State Hayward. I went from Indiana. I went to Cal State Hayward. And I studied with Jack Van Geem. I studied four-mallet percussion on marimba because he was a protege. He was a prodigy, on marimba. When he was 5 years old, he was playing by ear, 4 mallets. I know. So he was a great teacher, and he is the principal percussionist of the San Francisco Symphony. Now, but I studied with him, and my finished undergraduate with him, got a lot from him, a lot of concept and sound and ability. And that way I said, okay, this is what I want to do in addition to playing drums.
Gotcha. So then now do you divide time, like do you work on classical repertoire for the vibraphone as well as jazz? You do? Okay.
Yeah. Ian Finkel has some vibraphone studies for classical transcriptions for Bach, Telemann, all types of things transcribed for the vibes. I also have some Bach transcriptions that I do. 4-part chorales I always do. Yes, I do a lot of that. And plus, now, for me, classical music is memorizing Milt Jackson solos. So that's what I like. So here's a real quick story. Buddy Montgomery comes up to the house one day, and Milt Jackson is in town with the Keystone Corner with his quartet, I think it is. Dad always played MJQ, and he always played Bags, all the records all the time, and a lot of other cats. But MJQ every Saturday, we play something. So ding dong, knock at the door, right? And I open the door, and it's Buddy Montgomery, and I said, oh, no, that's Milt Jackson. And he's standing there. He said, where's your father? I said, he's here. He said, hey, Kirk, I want you to meet somebody. And he came down, and they're from upstairs and came down, and because they were in the house, I let him in. And they went downstairs, and Milt Jackson and my dad on brushes and Buddy Montgomery traded off between piano, vibes, and drums. It was awesome. And I got the bug. I was like maybe 16. So, yeah, that sound always resonated with me forever.
Here in the Northwest, we're really lucky. We've got yourself, we've got Susan Pascal, Jacques Willis. Ben Thomas.
Ben Thomas,
yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And all totally different approaches too.
Right.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
All right.
So I was telling you, my wife was the one that inspired me. She said, during COVID, I like to hear you play vibes rather than, play just fool around with them. So I went back to my college days and shed it 4 hours a day for 2 years. And it's starting to come along.
Well, so then now, here's the other question. You play vibes, you play drums. So when you're putting together your band, I mean, you must, as a drummer, have certain things that you. How do you go about putting together the concept for your band when you're leading as the vibraphonist?
I play what I like, first of all. Christine has always talked to me about playing more modern tunes, not just straight ahead, because that's what I'm about anyway. So I started adapting some Stevie Wonder into my music, some other things. But drummers, man, you got to be real careful.
Welcome to my world.
I gotta say, there's a lot of great drummers around. It's just we need to listen more. You know, it's like, okay, you got a lot of technique, right? But play the song. That's what Grady Tate and my dad and all these cats used to tell me about. Just make it swing, right? And so a lot of my big band training goes into my drumming. But I look for cats that just really want to have a good time and make the music happen as opposed to playing all over it. Which is what, who told me? Lou Donaldson used to tell me he hated a certain drummer because I never play with him because he plays all over me. Every time he solos, it sounds like something's falling down in the kitchen.
Yeah. Well, this is. I'm glad we're opening this door here.
I won't say who it is.
No, I mean, because you've had. We don't have to throw anybody under the bus here. But
No,
I mean,
I
with working, living in New York. When did you move to New York? What time period? What year?
I moved to New York in I went to NYU to go to NYU. 88.
Okay.
I made the plans in 86 in San
So
Francisco.
we're late 80s, early 90s, which is a great time for jazz in New York. I mean,
sure was.
Very lucky to have you, as you know, that
Oh,
experience.
man, it was great.
But I'm curious, just being in, you joined Lou's band and we're doing some tours with Lou. I'm just curious, some nuggets of wisdom that you learned from being in Lou Donaldson's band, who, of course, he's been with everybody, and Art Blakey and his own stuff for Blue Note Records and all the rest of this stuff.
Lou said, if I was a drummer, I'd just pat my foot and listen to the melody. I go, oh, okay. Yeah, you drummers just want to play all over the music. Just listen to the melody is playing. Make it swing. That was one. And then just being who you are. New York has a tendency to tell you you don't know who you are, and then you find out who you are. And that definition comes from the actual intense living style that you have to go through, that you actually become who you are. Confident, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I guess
what you
another thing I would ask about being in New York at that time, for the drummers that were out working, at least in your opinion, and which is you as well, what were the expectations of a drummer? Like, if you wanted to get called for gigs and be out working, what did you need? What tool set did you have to be a professional drummer in New York at that time?
You had to have a good time, for one. You had to be able to read. You got to be able to read in New York if you want to make a living. I mean, you can kind of pussyfoot around, dibble and dabble, make sure somebody else is paying your way. But if you're not reading musician or drummer in New York, you can't make it. So that was one of the biggest things I learned. And I mean, I came there ready, but I had no idea how important reading was until I got to New York City.
When you got to New York, I mean, obviously you had a huge stroke of luck in coming from the family that you did. I mean, that's a huge. You can't deny
I was blessed.
That's
I wouldn't say lucky. I was blessed.
Yeah. To have that training and then to move to San Francisco
Right.
and to have the experiences that you had. Did you feel when you got to New York at that time prepared?
Yes.
You did.
Yeah, I knew at 86. Glenn and I made this plan. Glenn and I said, man, we're going to New York. After we saw Peter Washington, because we had a 6-night-a-week gig at Milestones in San Francisco, at a club owned by Sonny Buxton, who is from Seattle. And we played with everybody, man. We played with singers. We played with Bobby Hutcherson. We played with John. It was John Handy's quartet. And then John got busy with his own touring and stuff and other gigs. And so we actually formed the group called Milestones. It was Milestones. We were the Milestones Quintet, I think it was, or Sextet, whatever it was. And so that we were accompanying everybody that came through. I was the first one to accompany Frank Morgan when he got out of prison. I got a story about that. Woo! But it was that kind of thing where you literally can. San Francisco was a incubator of talent, and it was a hotbed for developing that talent, right? And so when we saw Peter Washington get the gig with Art Blakey, and told Art Blakey told him be in New York in 2 weeks, and we said, okay. So he came through, and that we sort of prepared in terms of living, money, repertoire. I had to apply for NYU and get all that together. So did Glenn. And so we just kind of Glenn Pearson's my best friend. He's a piano player with the Count Basie Orchestra right now. So we just formulated this plan that we're going to New York. So I found the apartment in Spanish Harlem, and man, that was fun. It was never a dull moment.
Well, yeah, and probably vast different pace of life from West Coast to move to New York.
No
right?
car, walking, subway, boom, strap hangers.
Now, why did you settle on NYU as a college? I'm not judging. I'm just curious. Why did you decide to go there for education?
Master's degree in jazz contemporary studies. There's not that many places where you could actually get a master's at that time.
Who was on the faculty at the time?
No, Jim McNeely, Ralph LaLama, Tom Boris was in charge. He was what do you call it, head of the department, a jazz department. Michael Cochran. What's the goatee, tenor player with the goatee?
Joe Lovano.
Joe Lovano. And others. I'm trying to think of. Oh, Mike Richmond, on bass, drummer. Come to me. I can't think of his name right now. I know it's Adam Nussbaum. I tried to study with Adam, but Adam's so busy. I actually ended up studying with Michael Carvin, which was a godsend.
So you're going to school in New York, playing. What were some clubs that you would go check stuff out at on a regular basis?
Sweet Basil. I lived across. When I first moved there by myself, before I got the Spanish Harlem apartment, I lived on what do they call a sublet? Sublet. I lived across the street from the 55 bar. So the first night I was there, I heard Mike Stern. I think it was Mike Stern, yeah.
And Bradley's was still going strong at that point,
all the
too.
time.
Yeah.
So I studied with Alan Dawson when he came to play with Sir Charles Thompson on piano. I actually would hit up Alan because Alan was the master of what a master of drums and technique and sound and quality and concept. So I had to study with Alan because all the greats have. So I studied with Alan. I actually say, Alan, can I meet you at the club? So it was a nice little thing. Alan and I took lessons in the daytime when the club was closed. And he showed me a lot. So, yeah, that place, Sweet Basil, Blue Note, of course. And then I started doing the jam sessions for Winnard Harper. He started calling me because he got real busy with the Harper brothers. Yeah. And so that jam session that lasts from 10 to 2 in the morning, he would, he'd call me. I was like, wow, I was thrilled.
Have you talked with Greg about this at all? Because Greg played in Winnard's band when he was in New York for quite some time.
Greg.
Feingold.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you guys should have a conversation
we should.
about that. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah, it was funny.
So you're in New York going to school, playing, gigging. What happened after that?
In terms of...
Well, I know you mentioned going out on...
I see what you're saying. Well, I was gigging locally. And then my musical theater experience started kicking in. And then I started getting gigs. And then Eddie Alex and Patience Higgins, tenor players who were there that, do both worlds, musical theater and jazz straight ahead. Eddie's has passed on. Recommend me to Grady Tate. And that was like 89. I think it was 89. I was still in college. And Grady Tate had me come down, and I met him in the dressing room. He said, sit behind me. Sit behind me. And he was doing Black and Blue at the Minskoff Theater. So I sat behind Grady, and it was a big band, and it was Bill Easley. It was Sir Roland Hanna. I mean, I was like, whoa, all of my eyes were my eyes are bugging out. Bill Easley and great bassist, I forgot his name. But anyway, it was there was a show band with Carrie Smith and all the great Linda Hopkins and all these great singers and tap dancers and a young Savion Glover. So he was in it. Gregory Hines was in it. Sevion, all the tappers. So it was a show that I got in, and I subbed for Grady because he said he needed a sub at some point. He needed a day off because it was, and then I subbed for him a few times. And then the Gulf War came that ended that show, but essentially I got in that way. From there, it snowballed.
And I'm assuming that the pay scale is vastly different for shows versus club work.
Man,
Yeah.
I went from making $50 or $55 a gig to $400 a show. Yeah, it was vastly different.
Well,
Union.
which has kind of come first full circle because now in Seattle you've been teaching and playing doing gig work, but now you're picking up more and more and more show work. I've been seeing the last year.
Yeah, COVID kind of changed some things for me and the whole world totally. But I started working at the Village Theater was my first one, and then I did Mamma Mia there, and then we did the Wiz at Fifth Avenue Theater through recommendations from show drummers and show percussionists in town, and then I just finished Ain't Too Proud at the Paramount.
Is there another one coming up soon that you're prepping for?
Hello Dolly, Village Theater in May through July. So.
When we're getting towards the end of it, where
Sure.
I'm going to open up things for questions here. So, is there anyone in the audience, in person or online, that has a question for Brian? And if you're watching us online, if you don't catch us in real time, you want to do a question after the fact because this is going to stay up on YouTube or Facebook. Feel free to do that, and we'll get to them as we can. Yeah. So, are there any questions for Brian?
Nice. To tell you the truth, no.
The question is, are there
I've been gone so long.
any
Yeah.
recommendations for places to hear live music in the Bay Area? And Brian,
I went. San Francisco Jazz Center is one I definitely know of. That's one. I don't, it's been, I left in 1988, so I know a lot of, my friend Glenn works over in Oakland quite a bit, so if you want to text me, I can get you the names and places, but, there is a new place just opened, Keys? Yeah, I think it's called Keys in San Francisco, right.
is the Black Cat, is that in San Francisco?
I think it closed.
Oh, they gone? Never
Yeah,
mind.
I think
Forget us anything.
I think it closed.
Google it. That's what I would do.
Yeah, just
we'll
Google
find
it.
out. If you're watching this and you know of some great places to check out jazz in San Francisco, if you want to put them in the comments, that would be awesome.
And please do, because there's great players in San Francisco and great places to see them. So, yeah, please do.
Any other questions? Yes.
The club milestones?
The question is, you mentioned the band Milestones, and was it originated in Illinois, Evanston, Illinois?
The band I had was put together for the Milestones Club, right? Right. So it was me, Glenn Pearson, Mondre Moffitt, Peter Green, Clark Gayton, and first it was the second bass player was Peter Washington. So we were local guys in San Francisco that Sonny Buxton put together to accompany the people that he brought into the club.
So you're like a house band, basically, that would have
Basically, it was a house band.
Gotcha.
Right. We played a couple of tunes, and then all of a sudden, boom. And that's where Peter got the gig with Buhana, because Javon Jackson came through and saw Peter and said, "Oh man, this is a mini little Paul Chambers here." And so
Did he? Had you guys?
That was '86.
Had you guys been practicing like all of Blakey's arrangements?
Yeah,
and
we
tunes
did a
and
lot of
You
stuff,
had it?
and we
Yeah.
did a lot of original stuff that we all wrote too. But yeah, we did a lot of Blakey stuff because we had that lineup, saxophone, tenor, and alto, tenor, and trombone. Yeah.
Any other questions from our? Yes.
Yeah, I have a lot of memorable performances. In Oakland, I did percussion with Gladys Knight and the Pips, and was one Pip left, her brother Bubba, and that energy and the volume and the energy on that show, and it was just I need to move to New York. I had to get out of here. That was one memorable one. The other ones are all the Pointer Sister Ain't Misbehaving. We did 416 of them. So I subbed it maybe about 4 weeks. But the memorable ones were definitely with the Pointer Sisters. And then I had some memorable moments with Bobby Hutcherson, where I actually did the Milestones, where Bobby came in and just really blew everybody away. And last but not least, of course, Lou Donaldson, because I learned how to play fast with Lou. We're going to play a little tune not recommended for fusion musicians. Yeah, it's going to go real fast. It goes like this. And, dun, 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 and it was like way upstairs. So that was kind of some memorable moments, touring around with Lou and playing fast or playing with, what's this, Lacey? Steve Lacey? Yeah, we did in Italy. We did Steve Lacey concert, and we got there late because the train was late. Because we got taken off the train in Italy because, well, we were traveling black and musicians. And they took us off. We were late. We only had played for 20 minutes because in Italy, they don't mess around. They shut it down. But it was really nice to play with Steve Lacey, man. It was, that was a nice, him and Lou together, that sound. I was like, whoa. So,
now, this is interesting because you had mentioned Lou's thoughts about Alligator Boogaloo. Like, he wrote this song, and it was a huge success for him for the Blue Note record label and just monetarily, but he didn't necessarily like playing that song. Is that true?
He didn't like it. He would play it in Germany because we would play those. It was during the acid jazz time, and so it was a trade-off between Lou and DJ. They cut the lights off, and then the DJ would come, they cut the lights on, and then we play. So he was, instead of playing his regular stuff, he said, okay, he started playing Alligator Boogie. But he did it to make money. He didn't really want to play that. He just wanted to play saxophone. And he wanted to play changes and play pretty. I want to play it pretty. I can't play it pretty when I'm playing that stuff.
Oh, very cool. Any questions from anyone online or other questions here from people in person? No? Then I will continue barraging you with questions. So, can you talk about, you said you did a couple different tours in Europe with Lou Donaldson, correct?
Yeah, I did.
And who else was in the band with you at the time?
It was Jeff Fuller on bass and Herman Foster on the piano. Me, Herman, and Jeff. We used to go all the way through Europe on the Eurail, first class trains.
And at that time, Lou was playing more standards, or was he writing more original tunes?
He's playing what they wanted to hear. At that time, they wanted to hear what Lou played. Of course, they always asked for Alligator Boogie, right? He would play Blues Walk instead, right? He played that one, right? Because that went, the blues. But yeah, he played his music because he said he didn't really like to play the hits. I don't want to play that stuff. He said if you want to hear that, go buy the record.
So growing up with your father and going to shows, I'm sure you saw shows where he played with Wes Montgomery and the rest of these.
No.
No, you never went to those.
I was 8.
Okay.
I was 7.
Okay.
So apparently I was, when they rehearsed, because it wasn't the Master Sounds, it was just the neighborhood. Wes, Buddy, Monk, and my dad, they used to rehearse at Wes's grandmother's house, across the street from my father, and I used to be under the piano, apparently as an 8-year-old. And then Wes used to play the boogeyman with me. He tried to scare me, and I'd run away, and he had a ball. Apparently, he really liked the fact that he could scare the heck out of me as a kid. So, but no, I didn't see that.
Well, okay, so let's talk about growing up in San Francisco on the West Coast and being around jazz audiences there, then playing in New York, having jazz audiences there, and then playing in Europe, jazz audiences over there. What is your opinion about the differences in audience response? And
4 encores? And you got to, after 4 encores, in Germany, you got to say, Lou would say, man, I'm not going out there no more. They don't want you to stop. And I was signing records I'm not even on. So I was in Munich, I was in Frankfurt, I was in Hamburg, I was in Italy, and France, Paris, the New Morning Club. They wouldn't let us stop.
I'm not disparaging United States audiences at all. I'm just what do you attribute that to?
Well, they told me. They said Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, they're ours. America has Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk, Bud Powell. I went, oh, that makes sense. We love that. That's what they told me. That's how they saw music because it was so different than what they were raised with and what their culture is.
Did you ever do any tours of Asia with Lou or anybody else?
I went to Japan with Jimmy, and that was great. Jimmy Scott. Yeah, we did I did 5 years with Jimmy, and we went to Japan once.
And how were the audience? How was the audience response there?
Very nice. I mean, very polite. Yeah, very quiet, very orderly. When it's over, it's over. We got to go, right? Thank you very much. Arigato, gozaimasu, but man, they treat us like rock stars. Matter of fact, I couldn't believe it. They had one of those, what do you call them? Red carpets? Motorized at the airport. Now, this is not with Lou. This was another show called the Harlem Kid Symphony I did with the guys. There was one star named Harold from the show called Lost. He was actually in that show and a couple others. So he made it big as a star. But I remember seeing a red, I was like this like, box, right? And all of a sudden they hit a button and the red carpet went all the way down towards the where we coming off the plane. I was like, whoa. And it was long. It was like 30 feet. I was like, wow. And somebody tied it down and we actually walked the red carpet. I mean, they were amazing. Audiences there are amazing in terms of appreciation of American music.
So why do you think, and again, this is just your opinion, it's not looking for a right or wrong answer, why do you think that audiences here in the United States are not of the same caliber as in Europe or
We have
Asia?
too many different styles that we can choose from. We have a lot of different, it's like a smorgasbord. You can go over here and say, over here, over there. So we have a lot of different things and a lot of personal tastes that we like and can draw from. And say, okay, that's what I like. I can appreciate this, but I really like this. Whereas it's kind of limited in other countries. You have the folklorical stuff, right? And then you have the international thing, and then America's music really is, with rock and roll. I mean, look what happened with rock and roll first. Now it's hip hop. Hip hop has overtaken every culture there is, and there's 50 years of hip hop now. So I think this is just there's a lot of we have a lot to choose from, a lot, and we can just say, hey, look, be discerning listeners. I like this. I don't like that. I had a dean that told me I don't like jazz. We're not going to get an education, but she told me. She said I was hired as a jazz instructor. I just saw it as my little thing. I've been there since '96. It says music instrumental, and she said, Brian, I don't like jazz. Could you guys get together and play something by The Who? I was like, I'm done here as far as jazz goes. Anyway, I think that's, we can do that in America, man. You can say, I like this, I don't like this. And that's what you gravitate toward. Jazz is an acquired taste. I will tell you that right now. And I know it because I teach kids that basically don't understand it until I actually show them how to listen to it in a music appreciation. And all of a sudden they go, oh, you mean the end of the phrase? Just like when you're talking? You know the last word that they say? Listen to that? Say, yeah, don't listen to all the rest of it. What did they say at the end? Or what did they say at the beginning? Listen for timbre. I teach them how, timbre and what to listen to in each instrument, that kind of stuff. So I think the education is there in other countries because they do teach music appreciation in that way. In Europe, they actually get into tone, timbre, dynamics, tempo, harmony, rhythm, and they teach kids early time, especially in Japan. They're teaching jazz like early, elementary school, how to listen to it and how to play it, how to appreciate it. We don't get that here.
Before we're getting close to the end here, any other questions from people in the studio audience or online? Any questions? Yes. So the question is, do you think modern day technology is bringing more music and making it more accessible to people, or is it more diluting it? Is that, yeah.
Or more accessible? It's a double-edged sword. Technology is bringing more people to listening, because the listening devices we have are incredible. 4,000 songs on your iPhone, that's incredible. The clarity of sound is incredible. The access to it we have on the internet is incredible. But we also have a void in terms of people that really want to learn how to play an instrument. I know that for a fact because I teach kids how to make beats. Not only kids, but I have some older students too, on beats online. And a lot of them don't play an instrument. They do some incredible music for the computer, but they don't play an instrument. So I think like I said, it's a double-edged sword. We have access to incredible sounds and incredible resources to actually hear more music, which I think, people are branching out and going, oh, okay, I can, when 50 Cent brought in the club, the song it's Beethoven's Fifth. He sampled that into the song, right? I think, when I tell people that in my music appreciation, I go, oh, okay. So let me go listen to Beethoven's Fifth. So I think, there's that. There's the actual, bringing in other younger people and different people with musical tastes to enjoy what has come, what's happening now, and what's to come in the future.
Any other questions?
I just want to say thank you for having me. And like I say, this is a great forum to be able to speak and talk to people. And want to thank you for keeping the flame alive here in Tacoma. T-Town, baby.
My pleasure. It's always a pleasure having you here to play.
Thank you, sir.
To, document all these great stories and information. So before we wrap up, one final question that I like to ask all the guests. If someone were coming to you, and you have people coming to you talking about this, and they're saying, Brian, I'm thinking about, I would like to be a musician, or taking that up as either a career or whatever it looks like. What are some things that you've personally found very helpful for your development as a musician that you think are important that you would pass on to them?
First of all, get serious about a practice routine. Oh, no. First of all, find an instrument that you really love. Let's put it like that. Don't think it because somebody else tells you should play it or you think you should play it. If you find something you really love, develop a practice routine. Find a good teacher, right? Find a really good teacher and get serious about listening to people that play your instrument and other instruments as well. And second of all, get to the piano as soon as you can. So you should have your instrument and the piano. Now, if your piano is not your instrument, if it is your instrument, then I'd say, you're in good shape, but maybe try to find some other instruments that are more rhythmically involved, I should say. But yeah, that's the first thing is find the passion for it, the instrument, find a good teacher, right? And the practice routine, of course, that's got to be first and foremost. My dad used to say 5 minutes is better than 0. So that's what I tell my students.
Going back to the piano thing, Dizzy Gillespie played piano.
Yeah.
Miles played piano. John Coltrane played some piano. Clifford Brown played some piano.
Yep.
Joe Henderson.
Who
is it?
Dizzy?
Eric
Dizzy?
Dolphy. Everybody played some piano.
Yeah, played some piano.
If it's good enough for them, it's good enough for everybody else who's trying to do this.
That's right. And Kareem plays some really good piano.
Yeah,
I'm envious.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us, whether it's in person or online today. Thank you, Brian, so much for being our guest.
Thank
it's been
you,
a pleasure.
Kareem.
And thank you to our
It's my
sponsors
pleasure.
that help make this possible. So, of course, that's, again, KNKX, Ted Brown Music, Tacoma Creates, the Museum of Glass, Titusville Cars, Edward Jones, financial consultant Rick Gray, and everyone else that tunes in or comes out on a regular basis. We appreciate it. If you find value in these things and you want to support the work we're doing throughout the year, you can make a donation online via Venmo or PayPal or mailing a check or just coming out to things or watching them online and telling people about it. That helps too. So we appreciate it. It's a pleasure. We're going to take a short break, get ourselves reconfigured, and then get ready to play some music for you. So come join us in about an hour. Thank you so much.
Peace. Thanks, guys.